pushing for their last-minute fix before England shuts down again.
Charlotte Lynch reporting. Now, tomorrow night at 9 p.m. on LBC, you'll be able to hear my full hour-long interview with Sir Cliff Richard, which we recorded yesterday afternoon, and we covered a hell of a lot of ground. But I thought tonight I'd tease you a little bit and play you out the first few minutes. So come on, let's get wired for sound. It's great to finally interview you. I've been wanting to interview you probably for most of my adult life because I first saw you. You won't remember the occasion, but I first saw you when I was 15 years old when you were doing a show at the London Palladium in 1978 with the Shadows.
Oh, yes. I mean, the Palladium became almost like a home to us, and now the Albert Hall has taken over. But yes, I remember that occasion. But so you came to that?
Yeah,
what?
15 years old. I think it was the first time I'd ever been to a concert.
The other person that came to see me once at the Palladium was Elton John, but he was only 9. Well, I think he said he was 9.
Well, he's
either that or he's lying about his age.
I think that's probably the most likely explanation. Now, I've got your book here, and on page 233, you say, Gloria Hunniford is wonderful. Gloria doesn't interview me, we have a conversation. And that's exactly what I hope we're going to have over the next hour, because this is the extent of the preparation for this interview, a blank sheet of paper, because I like to have conversations, not rigorous interviews.
No, it's good to do that, isn't it, though?
I think one of the most interesting parts of the book is when you talk about your childhood and how you grew up, because it was, I mean, I hate to use the word ordinary, but it was an ordinary childhood, wasn't it, in many ways? I mean, you came to England from India at the age of 7, but when you got here, you led a very ordinary life, but you always had that ambition. Tell us about the ambition.
Yeah, but, just to go back to, I was 7 when I arrived. The thing about it was in India, we didn't have an ordinary life there because my dad had a good job. So we had, the apartment we lived in, which was above a chocolate factory, was absolutely paid for by his company. He was never short of any cash. But when we got to England, because it cost so much to get over, he ended up with £5 sterling, which I've been told now could be worth £200 now. But when you've got 3 children and a wife, that £200 wouldn't have lasted very long today. So, yes, and after that, we had a regularly ordinary sort of life. We struggled through at the beginning with living in one room, 6 of us, in my aunt's, my sister, my father's sister had a room to spare, and then we got a council house. But the thing is, in the end, what changed my life was music. And actually, on top of all of that, it was the fact that when I first heard Elvis, that was so outstandingly different to anything that I'd listened to on the radio. Prior to Elvis, it seems to me it was Bing Crosby and Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and, terrific singers, but they didn't, they didn't inspire us to be like them.
And the moment that you first heard Elvis, it's really interesting the way you describe it in the book. I think you were standing by somebody's Citroen and it was blaring out of the car radio. Just describe that moment.
Well, yes, the car pulled up and it was that old Citroen which had that kind of curved look. It looked like a spacecraft. And so the windows were down. The guy jumped out, ran into a newsagent's, and we're looking at the car. The radio's down, the radio's on, the windows are down, and suddenly we heard, "Well, since my baby left me." Well, it was Elvis, but we didn't know. The guy comes back, and we haven't even heard the end of the song, so we don't know who it is, and he drives off. And it was one of my friends. I had 2 friends at the time, my drummer, Terry, and another guitarist, Norman, and we were just hanging there looking at the space that used to be a car, and no idea who the singer was. And it was Norman who actually came back a couple of days later, because in those days we didn't have telephones in the house and things like that. We just had to walk to each other's homes. And he came round and said, "I know who it is. It's a guy called Elvis Presley." And we all laughed. We thought, Elvis, what a strange name Elvis is. Anyway, it was Elvis Presley and it was Heartbreak Hotel. And to me, when I think back, that was definitely the moment when I began to focus on what I wanted to be. Now, you can want to do something and it may never, ever happen. And this is where good fortune comes in that it happened for me. Thousands of us, I think, at that time wanted to be like Elvis. There's no doubt about it. And yet just a few of us got lucky. And so I still put that period down. Although, Ian, I don't know if I do mention it in the book. When I was in Australia once, this girl, a woman, wrote to me and said, you sent me this letter while you were still at school, and she sent me a copy of it. And it simply says, dear, I can't remember, Cynthia or whatever, but dear Cynthia, I go to a secondary modern school. I'm 12 and a half years old, and my ambition is to be a famous singer. I can't honestly say that I remember at 12 and a half, but I know my mum used to play the radio all the time, the light program, BBC light program, and music would be playing sometimes during the day. And so I probably listened to music, but it was strange. There must have been something to make a 12-and-a-half-year-old boy write that. But I still think of it as being the beginning was when I heard Elvis, and it led me to where I am now, really.
And you can hear the full hour-long interview with Cliff tomorrow night at 9 p.m. on LBC. It'll also be on my book club and All Talk podcasts in the next couple of days. After 9 p.m, it's the LBC Business Hour with Emma Jones. But coming up next, it's LBC's weekly political panel debate show, Cross Question. The lines are open now. The cameras are about to be switched on. Joining me are the Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green and Shadow Foreign Office Minister Catherine West, and the Spiked Online columnist and author of What Women Want, Ella Whelan. From our Leicester Square studio, special correspondent for the New Statesman, Harry Lambert, joins me, and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and MP for Tunbridge and Malling, Tom Tugendhat, joins us from his constituency. You can watch us on Global Player or LBC's YouTube, Facebook and Twitter channels. The lines are open now, 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, there still isn't a declared winner in the US presidential election, but the Democratic candidate Joe Biden's just been projected to win Wisconsin. That's one of the states won by Donald Trump 4 years ago. LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks says Mr. Biden's also broken a record.
He has secured more than 69,589,000 votes. That's the largest number of votes and counting that any candidate for the presidency has ever won, and he's beating Donald Trump in the popular vote.
The president's filed a lawsuit to stop vote counting in Michigan. He's been accusing his opponent of trying to steal the result with postal votes. MPs have backed England's second coronavirus lockdown, which starts at midnight. 38 voted against the measures, including Conservatives. Pubs, restaurants, gyms and non-essential shops will have to close for the next month. And NHS England's also moving to its highest alert level from midnight. And 2 supermarkets have cut fuel prices as UK restrictions tighten. Sainsbury's has followed Asda, dropping the cost by up to 3 pence per litre for diesel and 2 pence for petrol because of a slump in demand. The LBC Markets report the FTSE 100 has closed up 97 points at 58.83. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.10. LBC weather: dry night across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Low of -1 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Serena Farrow.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, good evening and welcome to Cross Question, LBC's weekly political panel debate show. We'll be here in LBC's Westminster studio each Wednesday at 8 o'clock to answer questions from you, the LBC listener. And tonight we have this is actually the autocue from last week, so we're not going to do that. Let me just introduce our panel to you. We have Tom Tugendhat with us. He's joining us from his constituency. He's Conservative MP for Tunbridge and Malling and chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And we have Harry Lambert, special correspondent for the New Statesman. He's sitting in the LBC studio. With me in Westminster, we have Catherine West. She is a Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister and Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green. And Ella Whelan is with us as well. She is a columnist for Spiked Online and author of the best-selling book, What Women Want. I don't know whether it's best-selling or not, but I assume it is. So welcome to you all. Let's go to your first question. question. It's from Frank, who's in High Wycombe. Hello, Frank.
Good evening, Ian.
Hi. What would you like to ask?
So my first question to the panellists, obviously it's a very divisive election, and obviously I think it's becoming clearer now that Biden's going to win. The main question to the panellists, when the government had the opportunity this afternoon to state their remarks to Donald Trump declaring victory prematurely and about the voting fraud, wouldn't it have been better for the government and the opposition both to state their positions on the new elect president when he wins, if he does, and how we can build a new relationship, obviously, with the US and the AMID trade talks? I think, obviously, looking at it independently, the best thing to have been done was to stand and say your position and how you will work with the new elect president or the incumbent if he was to win, to show that you're happy to put party politics aside and you're
Okay, Frank, your line is dipping there. I think we've got the gist of your question. Shouldn't Boris Johnson really have been, I suppose, more critical of Donald Trump's comments on electoral fraud at PMQs today? Tom Tugendhat.
Look, it's a fair question. I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because the United States has got a very, very long and proud legal tradition. They've got a long way to go before the answer to this vote. And it's not for us to tell the Americans how to do it. You know, they've got their own legal system that can perfectly handle the situations that are arising. If votes were stolen or if the election was stolen, that's one thing. And by the way, privately, we can all be critical of individual actions. And, you know, personally, I find the challenge to American democracy that he's been posing today particularly distasteful. But that's not for the government to say that. The government should wait until the outcome of the vote.
Ella Whelan.
Well, when it comes to democracy and kind of a belief in it and defence of it, it's obviously bad news if what should be a political game goes to the courts. I think that everyone can agree on that, because it isn't for judges to decide on this. It should be the people of America that do. Having said that, I sort of struggle to believe some of the people who are coming out so vociferously against Trump and claiming that he is doing this anti-democratic thing, which he may well be, because these are the same people that have, in the UK, for example, lots of them come out against a democratic vote in the form of Brexit for years and years. And there are many Democrats themselves who have tried by means of impeachment or trying to delegitimise Trump via legal means and other ways, who haven't shown a lot of respect for democracy. So, yes, I think that you should criticise what Trump's trying to do by basically shunning what should be a decision made fairly and freely by the American people. But let's not lose perspective here, because it's not like the other side are fantastic defenders of the value of democracy in and of itself. I wish they were, but they're not.
Catherine West, it surely is fair for Donald Trump to raise the issue of electoral fraud. It's not as if it hasn't happened in American elections before. Now, he doesn't seem able to cite any real examples of it at the moment. But and also, what about Keir Starmer raising this at PMQs? Because he will have known that Boris Johnson, there is no way that a British Prime Minister is going to stand at the dispatch box and slag off an American president.
I think that word fraud, it is a very strong word, and to use it you need to be able to back that up, and I don't think that Trump had the backing to use that word when he did, and I was very pleased that Lisa Nandy put Dominic Raab on the spot and said you should be more forthright. I mean, Mr. Trump's very forthright in his views, isn't he? I also think that there are certain interventions at certain times which have more strength, and when nobody's had any sleep and you are very, very powerful person, to use that word fraud, I think you need to think twice. But that is very much his style, isn't it? And I think that's why a lot of us would like to have a rest from Mr. Trump's outbursts, because they do go too far. And he could have implied that with other words, but instead it's this word which hasn't got the backing, it does just erode one's trust in the process.
Can you, in all conscience, say that if you were a Foreign Office Minister as opposed to a shadow Foreign Office Minister, and you were coming on this programme in exactly the same circumstances, that you would be able to sit there and say exactly what you've said? Because I suspect that the Foreign Office civil service, the diplomats in the Foreign Office, would not be pleased with you as a minister if you came on this programme and criticised the President of the United States.
But I feel with Mr. Trump that you do need to be quite upfront with him. You need to be quite direct with him and say what you think. Because I think with very powerful people, if you are just spineless and just sort of pretend it doesn't matter, or you're very diplomatic, I think in some ways you're not really matching them. Mr. Trump really respects Mr. Erdogan, Kim Jong-un. He's a real strongman guy. And I think you have to be a bit like that with him as well. And I feel that's the same with other leaders like Xi Jinping. Yeah. If you're just a sort of a lettuce, they'll just walk all over you. So I think you do have to actually call it out sometimes. And perhaps a day like today is a good day to say, only call it fraud if it really is fraud. Where's the evidence for that? Because that's how we sort of have an impression on people while they're thinking about our systems, and we shouldn't be eroding trust in our system.
Harry Lambert, you've written a lot about how Downing Street operates, the advisors that Boris Johnson has around him. What did you make of what happened in the Commons today?
Well, just first of all, it's interesting listening to this debate. I think the wonderful thing about today is that Trump has, in all great likelihood, lost. And so it feels a little bit like listening to a debate that we had to have for the last 4 years, but we will not have to have for very much longer. The fantastic thing is that Donald Trump's opinion on this election is largely irrelevant. And I don't think it would have been necessary for the government to engage with his words today, because it's not going to be necessary for almost anyone to engage with Trump's words for much longer.
That wasn't quite clear at 12 o'clock midday, was it? When we finished our election night programme last night, it looked as if Donald Trump was going to win. Now, that has gradually changed during the course of the day.
Well, when did you finish your programme?
5 o'clock.
Well, I'd actually suggest that after about 4, it was increasingly in Biden's favour. I mean, everything shifted around 3 a.m., right? So I don't think you probably want me to get into the whole details of how it went down last night.
That's not my recollection at all. But anyway, let's not fall out over that.
No, sure. I just think it would have been foolish to engage too heavily with a moving target and with one that, as I say, in all great likelihood is not going to be a problem for much longer. Let's wait for the next president. Why engage on this issue while this is up in the air?
Okay, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It can be on the American election, it can be on lockdown, which of course starts in 3 hours and 50 minutes in England, or any other question that you'd like to put to our panel. 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, if you're listening to us, you can watch us as well on the Global Player or on the LBC YouTube channel, Twitter feed or Facebook feed. Frank, do you want to come back on what you've heard?
Yeah, no, I understand everyone's position on not getting involved and meddling in the election. All I would say, when it's become increasingly likely during the hours that President Trump will not win, I think it's the UK's chance to have reflected on Biden's position on Brexit and the trade deal and the border of Ireland, and to actually put forward a case that you would work with him positively to address those issues for UK benefit, because obviously the special relationship is still there. But no, I can understand that Trump may not win now, so it's actually about engaging with who will be the elected Democratic President of the United States. I don't think that would have shown an interference. I think the government's been fairly weak on that position.
OK, Frank, thank you very much for your call. Let's go to Lorna, who's in Cheam. Hi, Lorna, what would you like to ask?
Hi, I'd like to ask the panel their opinions on the electoral college that we have in the States, that process of electing the president, what their opinion is of that, if they think it's a fair way of electing a president with that process.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting question. We talked about that a lot on the show last night, which you can catch up on YouTube. If you've got 7 hours to spare and you want to rewatch it, please feel free. Go to the LBC YouTube channel. The Electoral College, let me just give a quick explainer for those of you who don't know what this is. In American presidential elections, it's not just winner takes all. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump last time, but she still lost because of the Electoral College. And this is made up of representatives from each of the 50 states, and they're allocated seats on the Electoral College dependent on the population. So the whole point of it is that the states on the east and the west coast don't dominate everything. It gives the smaller states a bit more of a say, and you have to get 270 votes in the Electoral College to win the presidency. And at the moment, Joe Biden's on 237 and Donald Trump's on 214. There are 538. I still don't know what happens if it's a tie at 269.
I could tell you.
Maybe so. Harry, go on, because we tried to get the answer to this question last night and no one knew it. Go on.
So it's very problematic for Biden at that point, but it won't happen in that it goes to whoever has the most House delegations. So each state has a delegation. California's one delegation, Wyoming's another delegation. Whoever has the most delegations, whoever has 26 wins the presidency. Does that make sense?
It does.
Well, it's
make
slightly
sense.
more. There's a little bit extra to that.
Please,
which is that the Senate votes for the vice president.
That's true too.
Oh, really? Well, that would be interesting. So Joe Biden could win the presidency and then have a Republican vice president imposed on him. Is that what you're saying?
Well, except that there are 50 states and most of them aren't Democrat. So it's not like the Electoral College. It's all very complicated. So the Electoral College, there have been moves in America to abolish this. It's usually the person that loses the presidential election that thinks it's an absolute outrage that the Electoral College system is there. But it was created for a reason. Ella Whelan, what do you make of it?
Well, I think that point that you make, which is it's usually the loser that quibbles it, is important. I rang up my friend in America, Sean Collins, who writes for Spiked, and asked him, how important is this whole debate? And he said the key thing is that it's only really ever relevant for people when it's a moment when it's opportunist, a good opportunity for them. And then you can have arguments, as you've outlined, on both sides. And obviously I'd be very much in favour of ensuring a system that had better democratic engagement. One of the things that's exciting about this time round is that it is the largest turnout in a century and that people do really care about the vote and want to get involved. But we can have debates about the system, but the question is it actually based on and not to sound like a broken record, but a defence of and valuing of democracy and the democratic input of every American, from street sweepers to professors, or is it something that's just a means to get your guy over the line? And I think more often than not, it is the latter, and that's disappointing.
Okay, Harry?
Well, look, of course, this is a flawed system because Democrats have won 7 of the last 8 elections going back to 92 under the popular vote, and yet they've only been elected 4 of the 7 times. So both in 2000 and in 2016, they were essentially robbed, and Biden.
Well, they weren't, because that wasn't the system. So how can they have been robbed?
Well, of course, no. Look, it's a loose term, but if you believe that a democracy should be run by the person that gets the most votes, then in that sense, obviously, there's a flaw there. So, look, on the surface, I think it's clearly a flawed system.
I don't agree.
Tom?
Sorry, forgive me for interrupting. I don't agree, because it depends what you think the purpose of democracy is. If you think the purpose of democracy is majority rule, then you've got difficulties with it. If you think the purpose of democracy is to bring together debate in a country and come up with as much as possible consensus-based solution that works for as many people as possible, then the Electoral College actually really does serve a purpose, which is, if you didn't have the Electoral College, many states in the centre would constantly be ignored because there'd be literally no point in campaigning there. There's nobody there, or very few people there. So you'd end up having a political class that concentrated entirely on the coasts. The important thing about the Electoral College is it forces not every candidate, but many candidates to actually invest time in what's sometimes rather disparagingly called the flyover states. And, I think that's important, because democracy is about making sure that everybody has a say, not just that the majority wins every time.
But it is an old system where states like Iowa and New Hampshire, which hold the first caucuses and primaries, they get disproportionate influence on who the candidates are going to be, don't they?
Sure, and all systems of democracy have flaws. I mean, you don't need me to tell you what the flaws are in our system, Ian. I'm sure you know them only too well.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Oh, of course it is. Of course it is. The French run a different system of runoffs where you end up with two candidates and then you have a binary choice. Everybody runs a slightly different system. The Irish have 3 or 4 MPs in different seats. There isn't a correct way of doing this. You've got to find a way that balances and works with the consensus of your society. And though, I think your first speaker was absolutely right. I think she's absolutely spot on. It becomes an issue when people lose. But I'm afraid that's the nature of democracy.
Electoral reform in this country, Catherine, obsesses a very small group of people, mainly Liberal Democrats, it has to be said. But Tom's right, isn't he? There is no perfect electoral system. Every system that people come up with has some flaws.
I think ours could be greatly improved in the upper chamber, though, in my humble opinion.
Well, let's park that one to one side and let's concentrate on the Electoral College.
Because the regions, just to say, in this system, the regions really have a voice, don't they? And actually it forces, certainly in the case of the Democrats, it's forced a selection of a candidate who's much more moderate than perhaps what may have been the person who may have been chosen if the Democrat Party could just choose whoever they wanted. So that's a very interesting thing. How do we appeal to as many people as possible who are different from us, who are normally in political parties? So that's quite an interesting exercise for a political party. But I think the second thing to say is if you can somehow express what people in the smaller regions want, I think over time you end up with a better political process. And I think we really learned a lot about that in the last 4 years, that just because you're articulate or you live in a city, you sometimes, if you're not speaking to the other parts of your country, you can end up with a big divide. Not that it's not divided in the US, of course.
Who are you talking about, Boris or Jeremy?
Well, just in general, I think Brexit was quite a divisive topic, and I think it was a surprise result because we think we know what people say, we think we know what people think, and what it showed us is that we don't know what everyone thinks. But if, for example, in the House of Lords we had proportional representation according to regions and we had genuine representation from people in those regions, we might hear a little bit more. Okay. Whereas instead we have this very bloated 900 strong people who, some of who are excellent and others who...
I think it's 800. But,
anyway, I think we could be doing much more.
Ella, you wanted to
just
make
a tiny point, because I think we're in danger of relegating democracy to just a process of how you vote, a kind of a technical thing, when actually I think we should think about it much more as something that is a spirit, and I don't mean that in a sort of like ridiculous way. I mean in terms of it's a thing, a living thing, which in the case of American elections, I'm not even going to get into Brexit because everyone knows what I think about that in relation to democracy, but in relation to the American elections, there's interesting things happening for the spirit of democracy. On the one hand, I've already mentioned the high voter turnout, but also you've got attacks on it, both from Trump trying to do this via the Supreme Court, but also from the fact that pollsters got it so wrong, that they're so out of touch with...
We may come on to that.
With people, but more actually, I think more importantly, for the big problem that the Democrats have is they can't buy into the fact that the average American who might support Trump is not a kind of mad racist xenophobe, but is actually someone who should be listened to, and that's the spirit of democracy that I think needs to be reinvigorated.
Okay, we'll keep your questions coming to our panel. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 8:20.
LBC.
Take your earmuffs off, put your mittens down and listen up. If you own a home in England, you could wrap it up with a Green Homes grant from the government worth up to £5,000. It covers up to 2/3 of the cost of improving your home with energy-efficient insulation and low-carbon heating. You could also top up with other measures to help reduce your energy bills, like draft-proofing and heating controls. Work must be completed by the 31st of March 2021. Find out more today at gov.uk/Green Homes Grant. Eligibility and conditions apply.
Global Player is the official LBC app. Download it from your app store now for free or go to globalplayer.com.
At Nissan, we integrate innovation and technology into our cars to help you live richer. To make your drive a lot less and a lot more. To find the Nissan that's right for you, join us at our Innovation Celebration event from the 2nd to the 30th of November and get an extra £500 deposit contribution towards a Nissan Juke, Qashqai and X-Trail, available at 4.99% APR representative. Search Nissan. Available on PCP Nissan Finance. Order by 30th November. Register by 17th December. Participating dealers only. Excludes Vizia. T's and C's apply. Visit nissan.co.uk.
When was the last time somebody bought something from your website? In fact, if you didn't have to pay money to search engines, would you be able to sell anything at all? With Golgi, you don't even need a website to sell your stuff online. Just go to golgi.com, add your name and product list, and start selling. Simple, right? The best part? Golgi doesn't take upfront fees or commission. It's all about you and your customers. So why make selling online complicated? Let Golgi do the hard work for you. Want to sell? Golgi.
That's GOLLGI.com. We're all looking forward to next year's summer getaways, whether it's a short city break or a relaxing beach escape. And although travel might not be at the top of your list right now, with the British Airways American Express credit card, you can look forward to future trips every time you use it. You'll collect one Avios for every £1 spent on purchases. And as a new card member, you'll receive 5,000 bonus Avios when you spend £1,000 in the first 3 months of card membership. With the British Airways American Express credit card, the world will be your reward. Search BA Amex for details. Representative 22.2% APR variable. Applicants must be 18 or older, subject to approval. Terms, conditions and exclusions apply.
Swale Heating. We don't cut corners. We take the time to do things properly, to find you the perfect boiler. From top manufacturers like Worcester Bosch. Then our expert engineers will install it perfectly. Swaleheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
24 minutes past 8. Let me reintroduce my panel to you. Catherine West as Shadow Foreign Office Minister, Ella Whelan from Spiked Online, Tom Tugendhat, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and Conservative MP, and Harry Lambert, Special Correspondent for The New Statesman. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973. Right, let's go to our next questioner. It is Robin in Whitehaven. Hello, Robin.
Hello, Ian. My question is, given that it's just been announced that Joe Biden's received more votes in the history of the American elections, I think it's somewhere around about over 60 million so far, and still counting. Is that a mandate for a socialist policy, socialist government?
We had a bit of a debate on this last night where I had a Republican guest who kept calling Joe Biden a socialist. And I said, well, in this country, he would be a moderate conservative, be like Tom Tugendhat. And I said, what does socialism mean to you? And all she kept going on about was Medicare. And I'm thinking, well, if believing in sort of a national health service makes you a socialist, then I suppose most people in this country would describe them as themselves as socialists. Catherine, let's come to you. Mandate for socialism?
Well, definitely a mandate for the things which those of us on the left of politics really want to see, which is addressing climate change, obviously being a bit more multilateral in outlook.
See, Tom can take both of those, I think.
Yes, he can. And also, I think, a real commitment to addressing COVID in a globally inclusive way.
Catherine, you're a Conservative. I'm delighted to hear it.
I think you're a bit closer to me, Tom, at the moment, to tell you the truth. And then, obviously, looking at some of the questions which really trouble us, like people movements throughout the world. What do we do about the fact that climate change is forcing people out of countries as well? And inequality, how do we try and make sure that we don't get that massive divide in politics because we live completely different lives. We walk the same streets but live different lives. So I think he has a massive mandate and the expectations will be sky high. And how much can you achieve in 4 years? But I would just hope that we can refresh the leadership on some of those international organisations, look again at proliferation of arms, look again at climate change together, look again at what COVID is going to do to all of our economies collectively, and all of those really difficult things which I don't feel Trump really ever wanted to address.
Harry Lambert, a mandate for socialism?
Well, the big problem here is that Biden clearly has that mandate, but he's not going to control the Senate, or at least it's going to be very tough. It looks like it's 50-48 with a couple of runoffs in Georgia, they're going to happen in the first week of January, almost as if we have a French system, Tom. So, or rather, the Americans do. So, the
Americans,
yeah. So, I think of them as the world government. So, anyway, 50-48, and unless Democrats can win both of those Georgia special elections, then Mitch McConnell and the Republicans will be able to, as they did with Barack Obama, stymie Biden's agenda, and that's going to lead to a lot of tension, I think. So, that's the real problem for Biden. If he doesn't control the Senate, how much can he really get done? Can he proceed on climate change bills, stimulus bills, an infrastructure package, immigration reform? All these ideas, all these things he supposedly has a mandate for, he has to get them through the Senate.
But as Catherine says, he is used to working across the aisle. He was a senator for a long time. He's got existing relationships there.
I don't think
he ought to be able to do that.
Sorry, I don't think there is an aisle anymore. There hasn't been an aisle in my adult lifetime ever since Obama was elected in 2008. Arlen Specter, when he signed up to the stimulus package Obama wanted to introduce after the financial crash, was essentially forced out of the Republican Party, forced to join the Democrats. There's no record, at least not one that I know of, where you do get this sort of bipartisan consensus.
Okay, Tom?
Look, I think Harry's raised some interesting points there, and I most importantly, he's raised the point that his adult life is a lot shorter than mine. I certainly remember Ronald Reagan working cross-party or bipartisan, as they say, and it's certainly true that. Here we go. I'll hit back though. Biden has been a senator for as long as I've been alive, so it's a hell of an experience he's got. But I do think that the control on him of the Senate, both the Senate and the House, is rather greater than I think is very often appreciated. I mean, and the use of executive orders by presidents, which really grew under Obama and then was further used by Trump, is something that has made American democracy feel a bit less solid, because of course these are not laws that are passed but wishes, and therefore they're easily reversed. So I think there's a challenge here in achieving whatever he's going to try and do. And so although it may be a mandate for many things, there's lots of competing mandates. The members of the House of Representatives, the congressmen, feel they have mandates, and they do. The senators have mandates, and they do. And so all those mandates are in competition.
Ella?
To pinch myself, so I'm not sure whether I'm living in an alternative universe or some kind of wet liberal nightmare, but the idea that Joe Biden is someone that the left should get behind, or someone that socialists should get behind, is ludicrous. I mean, this is a guy who is quite literally the embodiment, almost as much, if not more than Hillary Clinton, of the American establishment elite. By the way, that's why he hasn't got as much of a landslide as he predicted. He's got nothing exciting going for him in terms of policy on healthcare. He might push the buzzwords in relation to climate change. One of the big things that the Democrats have got wrong, if you look at the way that some of the votes are turning out, is that they push the identity politics line, talking about people in terms of their sex, their gender, their skin colour, and making that the big deal, when actually, if you look at the way in which Trump is, in some small way, the vote is doing interesting things in relation to black people and Latino voters, this is much more an election, you could argue, based on class. And the one thing the Democrats are not interested in is class, and in the interests of working Americans, much like the Labour Party in the UK, wouldn't know a working class person if they bit them on the backside. So please don't try and spin this as Biden as a socialist. I can't get my head around the problem as someone who is genuinely on the left, with people screaming communist or Marxist every time one of the Democrats open their mouth, because it is just really making a mockery of what should be left-wing principles.
I think he does get inequality, doesn't he? Because, he grew up in Scranton, and from what we've learned through, watching him engage, I think there is a level of trust. And importantly, he's been given permission. If he wins, we're still thinking he's going to win, and you're giving me lots of assurance over there, so I'm very pleased.
But he's got nothing transformative for American workers. I think you have to earn
permission electorally to do things. So, and we've really learnt that in the Labour Party in recent times, because if you just have a very purist, classist approach about, whatever it is, you have to earn permission. Otherwise, you just get discounted. So I think he's at least earned permission to talk, and I think the party behind him will hold him to account on that. And I think there are still very good trade unions who are fighting very hard in the last 48 hours.
It's interesting what you said about working class. I was watching the BBC election coverage this morning, and they had a correspondent on who actually said that appealing to the working classes is economic populism.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that just sums up the problem, the arrogance of using that phrase with regard to the so-called working classes. I just thought, well...
But I hope that Biden and the Democrat Party look at why they thought they were going to do so well and only scrape through. Let's say that they do scrape through. Because I think that when Trump was talking about jobs, and I'm on your side for your job, that was his most compelling message. Forget about all the other things and the fraud and all that. That, for me, as a Labour MP, I listen to that and I think we have to be talking about that more.
And whatever you think about Trump, he had a vaguely optimistic message. And if you look back in history at elections in this country and America, the optimistic candidate usually triumphs over the less optimistic candidate. Now, that may not happen here, because, I mean, I'm not sure that Biden's had a very optimistic message.
People want to vote for someone who makes them feel good.
I think people want to vote for someone who listens to... I mean, look what the Labour Party did. This is the trend. The people vote for Brexit. The Labour Party said, you didn't want that, actually. You wanted something else. And then you got trounced in the general election. The same's happening in the US, where Democrats say, you don't really want to talk about jobs. You want to talk about Black Lives Matter or, climate change or birds going extinct. And look what happens. So there is a lesson to be learned.
You're forgetting that he is actually possibly about to win.
Well, that's
listen,
it.
We're
gone.
But not by the crucial point. It's not by the landslide he wants.
We have to move on now. Thank you all very much. Robin, apologies, I'm not going to come back to you because we are running out of time. Thank you very much for your question. It's 8:33 on LBC News Headlines with Serena Farrow.
While counting continues in the US, the presidential race currently has no clear winner, but the Democratic candidate Joe Biden's been projected to win Wisconsin, one of the states won by Donald Trump 4 years ago. From tomorrow, there'll be a new regulation for all secondary school pupils and teachers in England. They'll have to wear face masks in communal areas. It's been issued by the government after MPs overwhelmingly approved the new coronavirus lockdown in England, which starts at midnight, although it's understood a challenge is being mounted in the House of Lords against the shutdown. And a further 492 people have died with COVID in the UK. That's the highest daily number since the 19th of May. LBC weather, clear skies this evening, mostly for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. More frost and fog on the way though, cloudy and drizzly across Scotland with a low of -1 degrees.
This is LBC. The USA election explained on LBC.
With Betfair, please gamble responsibly.
I'm LBC's US correspondent Simon Marks, looking today at when we might know the result of the election. Under normal circumstances, we would confidently predict that by the time you wake up on Wednesday morning in the UK, the outcome of the election would be done and dusted. Victory and concession speeches would have been made. But this may be no normal year. So many people are voting by post, and in some states, postal votes must still be counted, even if they arrive after Election Day. So if this election is even vaguely close, we could be in for a long wait. We do know for sure that America's next president will be sworn into office at high noon on January the 20th. So any disputes have to be resolved before then.
The USA election explained
with Betfair. Please gamble responsibly.
LBC.
Hi, I'm Richard, a TfL customer service assistant on the Underground. I'd like to tell you how we're making it safer for you to travel at the moment. Everyone must wear a face covering at all times on public transport, unless you're exempt. There are also directions around the stations for everyone to follow to help with social distancing. As someone who spends all day on the tube, it's great to see how many of our customers are embracing it. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
If you're looking for work or your income has reduced, you may be able to get financial help from the government. Search Employment and Benefits Help. Eligibility criteria apply.
You wouldn't leave your front door wide open, so why leave your digital world exposed? Bitdefender is the award-winning antivirus solution that protects over 500 million systems worldwide. Tough on threats and light on your system? Get it now at bitdefender.co.uk. Bitdefender. Choose what the experts use.
As we all adjust to the latest government guidance, at Tesco we wanted to reassure you that we're doing everything we can to help you shop safely. we're installing a simple traffic light system at the entrance to our larger stores to help manage the flow of customers. Once inside, please stay within the 2-metre markers and make use of the hand sanitizer and cleaning stations. All our colleagues are provided with face coverings to protect themselves and you. We ask that you wear yours as well. Tesco. Every little helps. See tesco.com for more details.
There's a smart new way to buy a used car, and these guys are all over it. They've just gone online to Kazoo, picked out the car they love and had it delivered to their home. And they've got a 7-day money-back guarantee to make sure they really love it. Play us out, boys. Can you buy a used car in a smart new way? Kazoo, yeah you can.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:37, our panel, Catherine West, Ella Whelan, Tom Tugendhat and Harry Lambert, here to take your questions, 0345 6060 973. Well, let's move away from the American election now. Phew, say a lot of people. Lewis is in Mansfield. Lewis, you've got a really important question.
Hi, Ian. Yes, so it's regarding lockdown and how businesses prepare and manage to prepare for what's presumably going to be quite a difficult time. And given that we've had almost another 500 deaths today reported, what's the likelihood of the lockdown being lifted on the 2nd of December? Most businesses can prepare for good and bad news, but uncertainty, when we all really kind of know in our hearts it's not going to be lifted, it's probably going to be extended. What kind of certainty can that give to people like me as a small business when I'm constantly unsure of the next step the government's going to make?
Harry Lambert, is it possible for any politician in government to give certainty over something like this?
No, absolutely not. We've seen that already, haven't we? I've been sitting in the Commons chamber listening to Boris Johnson swing from one plan to another over the past month. And it's very hard for anyone to give certainty, which I completely empathise with here. But we just have to think about what the pressures are. The pressures are the media treats, quite rightfully perhaps, rising numbers of COVID deaths as a front page story. The Number 10 team know that that's what they're being judged on. They're being judged on that internationally. There is no room for manoeuvre for them. If the case totals and the death totals are rising, then everything else will come second, including freedom from lockdown.
Tom Tugendhat, is it possible to give Lewis and anyone in the business world any degree of certainty on what might happen on the 2nd of December?
Well, we know that these orders will expire on the 2nd of December, so the government would need another vote. But that's not a good enough answer, and I appreciate that, because what we really need is an answer that goes much more towards explaining how we can live with this, I'm afraid. Because if you listen to countries around the world, if you listen to, for example, the Australian government or the German government, both of whom are planning for various forms of COVID support or lockdown arrangements to last until 2022, not until Christmas, I think we need to have a plan that really takes into account the fact that this is, for a while at least, a new normal. We need to be thinking much more long term. And we need to be, frankly, very clear, or as clear as possible, that even when a vaccine comes, and I very much hope one does come soon, it's simply not going to be, the miracle cure-all. It'll be a step in the way of getting in the right direction of being able to reopen our economy. But this is really painful.
There were 37 rebels on the Conservative benches in the vote today. Were you one of them?
I wasn't. Like many colleagues, I was enormously tempted to be one of them because this is an extraordinary balancing act we're making. And, what we're asking young people to do, what we're asking business owners to do is really hard. What we're asking older people to do is incredibly difficult. And we're putting extreme restrictions on a country that, frankly, shouldn't be going through these, except for one thing, and that is in the balance of risk. And I've thought about this for days, as you can imagine. I've spoken to many GPs in the constituency I'm privileged enough to represent. I've spoken to people who run the healthcare trust and various things, but I've also spoken to, quite literally, read emails from is better than spoken to. Read emails from quite literally hundreds of people who I've asked to write in, and they have, expressing their views. And I've read them very carefully because this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And I didn't do it with any joy at all. But when the situation was laid out to me by the healthcare professionals that we could easily get to the point in but a few weeks where the beds were full, the oxygen was taken, and if somebody came in with a broken leg, the answer would be, I'm really sorry, we can't take you. I'm afraid that balance of risk was too great, and I simply had to vote to make sure that we had a health service that was able to provide for the needs of the people.
Catherine, Keir Starmer went heavy on this at PMQs today and really held Boris Johnson's feet to the fire. But again, asking him a question which I felt, well, it's almost impossible to answer. And Boris Johnson said, well, yeah, they will expire on the 2nd of December. But as Tom just said, they could be renewed with a vote in Parliament. It's impossible to say what the situation will be a month ahead, isn't it?
But he's trying to shake up the test, trace and isolate. I mean, under 20% of people who know that they should be isolating are isolating, under 20%. And yet we're putting all the young people... That's their issue,
isn't it? I mean, you can't force people to, can you?
Yes, but other places manage. What is wrong with us that we cannot manage this system?
But that's a question we should be asking ourselves rather than blaming it on the government,
No, but the system also, there was no review. There should have been a review in the summer. Then they wasted the summer by failing on the app. Remember the Isle of Wight and the app and everything? Billions have been spent. It's all gone into the Serco... pockets of the Serco people, and it's just not on. You know, if we have a much better test, trace and isolate, get local government involved, share out some of that bounty and actually give it to public health professionals, then I think we could have a much better system. And also the testing, there were lots of universities who put up their hands who could have done, the small boats, as one of the testers said, one of the scientists, because if we could just get borough by borough testing, at least that could sort out the schools.
But Public Health England wouldn't allow that to happen. That wasn't a political decision.
It was a completely political decision.
How
they
was
just
it a political
opened a tip truck of money and gave it to Serco and said, get on with it. And what we're going to do is appoint one of our mates, one of our friends, who happens to be in the House of Lords, to look after it all. If you're
who's that? What, Dido Harding,
yes.
you mean?
And I just don't think that's good enough. You need to have a job advertisement. You need to get someone who's qualified. Don't just give it to your friends to do. You're getting me onto my favourite subject now, Iain.
She's also the wife of a Tory MP. It has to be a bit more than a friend. Ella?
I think that I'm not a betting woman, but I'd say that pretty confidently that this isn't going to end on the 2nd of December. And the main reason for that is that the government does not have, we can all be sort of sympathetic and say this is a very hard job and I wouldn't like to be Boris Johnson, I wouldn't be like to be making these decisions, fine. But where you have to be critical is you say that because of the political decisions taken by the government in the last few months, they've all but lost the trust and good faith of the public. I mean, the fact that we know that people aren't isolating when they get the notification to do so is not just because, they're selfish and want to keep going out and having fun. It's because sick pay is so poor, for example, that if you go off and many people work in precarious employment, you just can't afford to risk that loss of employment. And so they make their own risk assessment and carry on. That's not necessarily being selfish. That's people being in a very tight situation. But more importantly, I think the sort of demonisation of any criticism about the process of this ongoing lockdown release, new normal we have, which, I mean, Jesus, that's really that's depressing to think that this is the next, year and a half more that we've got ahead of us. In terms of uncertainty, the question that Lewis asked in relation to businesses, but not just businesses, but people's lives. I've heard the line over the last few weeks, but people saying about Christmas, what's the big deal? It's just a roast dinner. Why do people care so much about that? Surely there's bigger things to think about in relation to coronavirus. They don't understand that the average person's experience of this pandemic is, yes, a fear of the virus, more likely for their elderly relatives or people who are more vulnerable to the virus, not necessarily fear of dying themselves, but also a fear of, is this my life from now on? I mean, it often feels like, especially under this coming lockdown, the only legal thing to do is work, that you're allowed to do really, is work. I mean, is it sensible to stop kids from playing sport? Is it sensible to stop us going into COVID-secure environments to drink and socialise in COVID secure, socially distanced ways? Is that not just going to invite people to, when they're so frustrated at the end of their tether, break the rules and mix indoors? I mean, it's not based on a knowledge of what the public need to get through this. It's based on the government having its back up against a wall, and the only thing it can do now, because to suggest anything else is like saying you're evil and want people to die, is this process of lockdown release. It just, no one wants 500 deaths a day, but we also don't want to live like this. You've got to start talking about alternatives.
Well, I look forward to the day when Tom Tugendhat can sit here and Harry Lambert can sit here. But I don't see that happening anytime soon, it has to be said. 8:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
Conservative MP and Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who joins me now. You will be aware that in front of a panel of MPs yesterday, the two experts, scientific and medical, had to accept that it was a doomsday scenario at that Halloween press conference. It was based on evidence that was more than 3 weeks old. This is like a dodgy dossier, isn't it, Foreign Secretary?
What was being presented was a model, not a forecast. And that's quite right.
So we closed the country down on a model.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, weekday mornings from 7, LBC.
Hey, you know what they say, go big or go home. So for a big range of over 3,000 used cars to choose from, get yourself to Big Motoring World. Find all the makes and models of cars you need at a Big Motoring World location near you. Go to bigmotoringworld.co.uk. Find the menace from the M25. Hit it, ladies.
Jen's new smart speaker should be teaching her to cook a chicken. But it's not, because her Wi-Fi doesn't reach the kitchen, so she's winging it. Poussin le ceiling is served. Oh, why, Jen? Why buy the best home tech if your Wi-Fi won't support it? Well, with BT Complete Wi-Fi, that bird can still be basted. Only BT guarantees reliable Wi-Fi in every room or £100 back. Why choose anyone else? BT, beyond limits.
Up to 3 discs to guarantee 10 Mbps in every room or £100 off your next bill. Terms apply.
At the Halifax, we know that catching up and checking in on each other has never been more important. So when our customers couldn't come into a Halifax branch, we picked up the phone and gave them a call. In fact, this year we've made over 250,000 wellbeing calls to customers for a natter and a catch-up, just to see if they're doing okay. Halifax. It's a people thing.
Have a painting party, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Turns out, Prosecco and paintbrushes don't mix, and you can't always trust your friends to decorate your house. Thankfully, at trustatrader.com, you can find plenty of vetted, reviewed, reliable professionals in an abundance of trades. Like a painting pro, minus the Secco. After all, friends are for painting the town, not the walls.
Trustatrader.com. Business right now is anything but usual. At Square, we can help you take orders in more ways. Whether you own a pub, restaurant, cafe, or bakery, you can set up a free online ordering page and offer pickup or delivery. We can help you take orders in person too and accept contactless payments. You get your money the next business day with no long-term commitments, so you're ready for whatever's next. See everything we can do at square.com/UK. Square Up Europe Limited is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
From now until Monday the 9th of November, you can buy an approved used car from Volvo Select with 0% APR finance. With over 150 checks, so no need to kick the tires. A 12-month warranty, which you'll probably never use. And the latest software upgrades, which you definitely will. Visit volvocars.co.uk now to book your virtual appointment.
Used vehicles up to 4 years old. Participating retailers. 50% deposit on minimum £7,000. Conditional sale. Terms, eligibility, guarantee requirements and conditions apply. Volvo Car Financial Services.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Our proceedings might be interrupted over the next few minutes because Joe Biden is expected to speak live in front of cameras, and we will cross to that when it happens. But in the meantime, let's continue with your calls to our cross-question panel. David is in Hampstead. Hello, David. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Ian. Great show. I'd like to ask, why have Labour MPs decided anti-Semitism is important in hindsight rather than a year ago when it was happening?
Catherine.
general election loss, apart from needing to do this anyway, but there's nothing like a really bad general election loss to look at what was it on the doorstep. And certainly in Hornsey and Wood Green, it was definitely an issue of, we're not voting for you because you haven't sorted this out, and get your act together. And I would just really hope that with the Commission's report, the Watchdog's report, we can now move forward. We have the Labor Party has acted unlawfully in 3 ways, and we need to clean up our act. And hopefully with the new General Secretary that we have, and with the resolve that I think Keir Starmer has shown, that we can go forward and improve.
Why did it need a general election defeat to tell you that? Because I would have thought that was pretty bleeding obvious.
I think there's something about... we all knew it was a problem. It would come up in press interviews, but there is something about doing a minute or whatever you do when you're doing a general election, and having people telling you to your face that you are the Labor Party is my party, but I cannot vote for you because of this. And there's nothing like that over and over again.
How did that make you feel?
Really bad. And therefore...
And did you feed that response back to the centre?
I wrote to the party on a number of occasions throughout the period that we're talking about. Margaret Hodge is obviously my predecessor because I used to be the leader of Islington Council. I saw what distress she was under, and I wrote to the party. It took ages for them to come back and say this is being even looked at, and we failed.
Did you ever talk to Jeremy Corbyn about it?
Yes, we had a number of parliamentary Labour parties where people would say, this is a huge problem, what is being done about it? It was a tiny bit better when Jenny Formby came on, because that was what she had to do. She then got cancer, which was awful, and was not able to then feed back in a way that was... And so it just got worse and worse.
Was the party right to suspend Jeremy Corbyn?
I can't comment on that because I've
Why?
promised, because it is a complaint, all MPs have been asked not to talk about it publicly. And so, but I can say that I think that the General
Many MPs comment on it publicly.
The General Secretary of the Labor Party has acted in a way which is consistent with the recommendations of the report, which is not to minimise anti-Semitism.
What do you make of the fact that on the day after that, Jeremy Corbyn went to the Isle of Wight and stayed with the only Isle of Wight Labour Party member to be expelled for his views on anti-Semitism?
Clearly that is part of the same problem, which is...
He doesn't get it, does he? That's the problem.
The first thing was the minimising something. The second thing is, and the day that he did that, he wasn't actually a member of the Labour Party. So in hindsight...
You can't give him a free pass for that.
No, but in hindsight, for people who are on the left, and I voted for Jeremy twice because I know Jeremy well. I was council leader when he was...
Do you regret that now?
Well, he was the leader. He was the MP when I was the council leader, and during the leadership election, he ran a very effective leadership campaign. And he got 60% of the vote.
But given that you must have known him very well, given that he was your local MP, what on earth possessed you to vote for someone who was going to stand for the position of Prime Minister? You must have known that he wasn't equipped
I know
to
this
do
will
it.
sound strange, but when you are working with people locally on things like cycle lanes and council budgets and the housing revenue account, you don't always get round to talking about those other things. But I do think that the important thing is what we do now, because we've had the commission.
Right,
it's been very clear.
We've only got a few minutes left, and I want to bring the others in as well. Harry, you write for the New Statesman. Obviously, this has been a subject of a lot of column inches in your magazine. How do you answer David's question? Why have they decided to fight anti-Semitism in hindsight?
Well, on the surface, it's a very simple answer, right? The people have changed, so I'd actually take issue with the way the question was answered.
But Keir Starmer was in the shadow cabinet. Angela Rayner was in the shadow cabinet.
But they weren't in charge of the party. It's all very well.
They were endorsing a man to be Prime Minister who was.
Well, okay, but the slightly different question.
Others resigned. Others left. Others couldn't take it anymore.
Okay, Tom, I'll come back to you.
Well, just to answer Tom, look, I mean, I'm not a Labour Party strategist, nor am I here to defend Keir Starmer's decisions, but every politician has to make a decision about when the right time to jump is and when the right time to stick around and potentially take over the party yourself is. And I think it would be hard to argue with the way Keir Starmer's gone about things in the sense of being in a position to take over the party and then have a lot more power to deal with this now.
Ella?
I think that it's rather, it's telling to say that it took an election to force Labour to look at this. It's also telling to say that it took a formal investigation to force their hand, because everyone and their mum knew that there was an issue with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. It's all we've been talking about for the last few years. And so it's a bit gross to say that it only came to light now, and the question about it being in hindsight is a well-made one. The thing that's most frustrating for me, I think, is that the Labour Party, quite rightly a lot of the time, goes on and on about racism, the scourge of racism, and the need to fight it, except when it comes to anti-Semitism. I mean, it has a real blind spot when it comes to anti-Semitism, and you can't blame people for putting 2 and 2 together and ending up with 4 when it comes to that. The question for me is, with the, kicking out Jeremy Corbyn, whatever, I don't think he was the be and end all of the issue of anti-Semitism in the party. The question of the handling of his comments in relation to that mural still don't sit right with me. The question is, are they going to, it's one thing saying you won't do anything illegal, it's another thing saying, are you going to address the underlying problems that still remain within certain sections of Labour supporters who tie up a very crass understanding of anti-capitalism, this very shallow way that leads into a quite easy form of anti-Semitism? Is that being tackled? It's not just forcing your hand on, are you going to do anything illegal or not? It's, are you actually principled about this?
Tom?
Look, I have, and I have many Labour friends. In fact, Catherine and I work together on the Foreign Affairs Committee and have been friends. And there are many people who have stood up against it, and people like Ruth Smeeth fought it very hard and faced extremely high personal cost for doing so. Luciana Berger, I can run through several very impressive people of integrity who fought it at the time, and others were silent. And I'm afraid that silence.
But can I jump in there? Look at Brexit. The Tory party had many people of integrity who chose to stay silent when they disagreed with the Brexit policy being pursued by Boris Johnson.
I'm quite sure you can equate Brexit with anti-Semitism.
No,
it's not that, Ian. Thing to say.
No, Ian, it's not that. The point is, Tom is saying that a politician should always stand up for their principles, and I'm saying that clearly that's not always the case. There are ways to be powerful.
I'm saying I think anti-Semitism is a bit different than whether you have a tactical disagreement on the trade policy with some various countries nearby.
But Tom, what are you suggesting, that Keir Starmer should have resigned and therefore ruled himself out probably of taking over the Labour Party?
I'm saying that there are people of integrity who did stand up and did rule themselves out.
So therefore Keir Starmer isn't a man of integrity?
I'm merely identifying that there are some people who did. Now, how you choose to interpret it, Harry, is up to you. But I'm making a simple point that people like Luciana Berger and Ruth Smeeth were hounded out of the Labour Party for the fact that they were Jewish. Now, that's pretty extraordinary. It's absolutely stunning.
I completely agree with that. That's
OK, right. Let's call this to a close and finish off with a text from Georgia in Bristol. Ian got to interview Cliff Richard yesterday, something he's wanted to do since the age of 15. This is entirely true. What have you wanted to do since you were 15 that you'd still like to do? Ella?
I've always wanted to be on a game show. I used to be addicted to Wheel of Fortune when I was young, really addicted to it. And I got my opportunity. I was on Pointless.
I was on that. Did you win? In fact, I saw your episode.
The tragedy is I got my chance and I lost in the first round. Me and Nigel Nelson were a terrible team. And so I shot my 15-year-old.
Dare I say, Jackie Smith and I, we won. Catherine West.
Norway. I've always wanted to visit Norway, and I had a cruise booked with my mother, 85-year-old mother, and of course couldn't do it because of COVID. So
I took my mum to Bergen for a weekend once, so I highly recommend
by ferry? Because she really wants to go on the old postal ferry, because she did in 1960 with my dad.
No, wouldn't want to do that. Tom?
Yeah, look, this is something I wanted to do since I was 6 rather than 15, which is to drive a fire engine. So, if ever that is available, I would love to drive a fire engine.
You can't, how long have you been an MP now? 5 years, is it?
5 years.
I can't believe you haven't gone down to your local fire station and said, look, can I have a bit of a drive?
Maybe I should. Maybe that's what I should.
I think you should. Harry.
Week, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you saw the shot Obama made this week, the three-pointer he took. Obama ran for president when I was 15, and I played basketball, so I'd be very up for playing basketball with the former president and the current one if he's.
Well, you're about 6'5", aren't you? So you've got the height for it.
Hopefully.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed to Tom Tugendhat, Harry Lambert, Catherine West and Ella Whelan. If you missed any of the show and you'd like to catch up, it'll be on the LBC Cross Question podcast feed a little bit later. Join us next week. We have a star-studded panel. Can't tell you their names at the moment. It's a state secret. It is 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Joe Biden and Donald Trump's teams are expected to address Americans shortly, with no clear winner in sight, though. Both are claiming they're winning the race to the White House, despite votes still being counted in some key states. The Democrat campaign saying it's on the verge of victory. But the current president's accused his opponents of trying to steal the election. He's pointing to major fraud involving postal votes, but hasn't yet shared any evidence. Officials in one of the key states, Pennsylvania, say they're trying to get through votes as quickly as they can.
We'll be done as soon as